give my remaining time to the member from Dartmouth North, and I hope to get back and maybe have some more questions for the Minister.
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Minister, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Minister, before I start, I just want to thank my honourable colleague from Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, who's the critic for community services, and my honourable member from Sackville-Cobequid, who is the critic for housing, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you, Mr. Minister, on a number of issues around your portfolio of community services and housing. I want to tell you that for 4 years I've had the opportunity of bringing questions to you, and certainly having the opportunity of listening to your responses as well, or certainly having the advantage of listening to your responses as well. Mr. Minister, I will be over the field of your portfolio, so from time to time I may shift back and forth, but I'm sure that you will be aware of where I'm going. I do know that this government has not done nothing much with respect to housing developments in this province, except for a 15-unit housing complex in Middleton, the town of Middleton, in which 2 are disabled units. I do know that this government had before it a proposal or a discussion paper with respect to housing for tomorrow, a new direction in provincial housing, an action that this government could have taken upon. I do know that there are a number of senior citizens out there who are seeking and asking for seniors housing in this province, particularly in the metro area. I just came across the hall, Mr. Minister, where I was talking to the Minister of Municipal Relations and Service, Nova Scotia, about the Residential Tenancies Act and the kind of problem that tenants are having because of the significant increases in rent, particularly in the metro area, because people are migrating here to get the employment opportunities, placing a tremendous burden upon working poor Nova Scotians and Nova Scotians on social assistance to get adequate shelter components. I do know that. But I want to say to the Minister that that in itself is a very serious problem, and the Minister acknowledged that it's a serious problem and they need to address it now, because in a few years, in a very few short years, it's going to be a very serious problem. And I think with the RFPs that are out there now, requests for proposals around housing development, that you might have the opportunity to address some of that. My concern is around seniors. I don't know how many seniors there are on a waiting list now, but I'm told, and I don't know the actual waiting list number, but I'm told there are over 100 seniors waiting for seniors housing projects. And I do know that there are a number of seniors who would love to stay in their own apartment complexes if, in fact, they were able to get rent subsidies and they were able to stay there because they're familiar with the community, they volunteer in the community, and they would like to stay there. And this, Mr. Minister, would be a way of easing the burden and the pressure on some, on at least looking at some of the seniors' housing. So my question to you, Minister, is how many proposed senior housing units do you expect to have built in this year? And you probably can't give me an accurate answer because the RFPs haven't been in yet so that you would review. But how many do you expect will be new seniors housing units? And are you prepared to look at the rent, look at in fact the rent subsidy with respect to alleviating some of those pressures now?
Thank you, member. Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The honourable member has answered his first question in that it's difficult to answer until one has the suggested solutions in front of oneself. However, the honourable member has made reference to specific areas of great need in this province, and that is exactly why it was important to go out and do that research to come up with identified areas that might be in need of seniors housing. Others might need family, 3-bedroom family units. Others, it might be for non-elderly social assistance recipients, singles. So the honourable member has basically spoken to much of what we were able to confirm with the report that was done within Housing Services at the end of last year. But with regards to his point about using rent subsidies, it is an excellent point. That is a very effective and efficient way of targeting monies, and in fact, the independent organization, the C.D. Howe people, have said that that is 85% efficient as opposed to public housing stock, which is only 37% efficient in actually delivering affordable housing. And while we don't necessarily subscribe to everything from the C.D. Howe Institute, when they do these studies and they give such a market differential in the effectiveness of these two tools, and I see the member opposite, by virtue of his question, would tend to agree that the rent supplement approach is a good one. I like it because in this case it allows us to target lower income Nova Scotians, and in fact you can anticipate, honourable member, that this is the approach that will be taken by the province for our share.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm pleased to see that the minister acknowledges this, because I want the minister to know there are some good landlords out there, and there are some excellent units, and there are seniors who get established in a community, in an environment, and they live there and they want to be there, but they can't afford to be there, so are pushed out by way of their income. And they're pushed out of communities and neighborhoods in which they have volunteered, worked very hard, and continued to live there. The other concern is another concern that I do know that my colleague, the Honourable Leader from Cole Harbour, had put this forward to a question to you most recently. And that was the question with respect to elevators and seniors complexes. Those senior complexes that may have very well been designed for elevator units to put into them, but they have not had elevator units, and so on. And the minister, in your comment, you gave me the impression that you were talking about this being a matter of resources, of the utilization of dollars, and there was a way around that. And I was somewhat puzzled by your way around that, because it troubled me that you would in fact say that seniors who are now become more, I should say, have become greater disabled or have deteriorated with their physical structure over a period of time now could be shoveled down or shifted down to the ground floor unit, and they would be there. So it was a matter of utilizing the senior center to maximize its potential use by bringing the senior down to the ground floor who could no longer go up the stairs. Mr. Minister, what I would say to you is that's dehumanizing, because those seniors who have lived on the second floor or the third floor or the fifth floor have made that their home. It's like their community. They have everything in place, where their television's going to be, where their pot plants are going to be, and everything else like that. And as a result of moving them and telling them, because there's no elevators down there, you bring that down to the ground level. That's, in my opinion, somewhat discriminatory as well, by the fact that those individuals then can't make choices. Because they're seniors or they're disabled, they no longer can make choices. Government is making choices for them. These people have their faculties all together and want to live in that particular unit. So I would say to you, it's a matter of priority and where you divvy out your dollars. And I would say to you, there are a number of seniors whom in fact would be quite pleased to continue to live in their homes, or what we call units, without interruption. And I find that somewhat insensitive when it comes from the minister. When I stand here, knowing my physical structure and knowing what, the kind of things the comments that have been made across this legislative floor. I don't mean that to be an insensitive to your particular portfolio, Minister, but it comes across as such, and it needs to be really looked at as to how do we address the issue of providing for seniors or disabled persons without relocating them. And I'll also tell you another thing, that's an expense to those individuals, because they have to have their furniture moved down to a ground level. They have to get the reconnections of their telephone. They have to get the reconnections to their cable, and a whole host of things. So this is not just simply a matter of shifting people. So I'd like to hear your comment with respect to when can seniors housing, particularly since there's not a lot being built, can they expect to see elevators in those units?
Thank you, member. The Honorable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. I wasn't really expecting to have a chance to comment on the Honourable Leader of the Opposition's question from, I think it was last week in question period. He got up and he gave a civic address to describe a seniors unit. I believe that civic address that civic address includes, I believe, 4 units, and I think there's about 4 per unit, 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs. 3 of those units, or 3 of those buildings have elevators, the 4th does not. So in essence, that is a fairly good depiction of the situation as it pertains to seniors that need stair-free access to their apartments, because in that case you've got 16 apartments, 2 of which require you to use stairs, and that is about the percentage. It's 85% of seniors, public housing seniors apartment units in this province are accessible without the use of stairs. In other words, they either have an elevator or they're on the ground floor. The cost of putting an elevator in is somewhere in to the tune of $125,000. And $125,000 has to be weighed against how many other units could we put in, how many rent subsidies could we provide. It's making the best use of the monies available. The member opposite makes some points, and if you happen to be that senior that's faced with that challenge, I can understand that by times you might not want to make that choice. But we do bend over backwards to try to accommodate seniors. We try to make sure that their apartments are accessible. If through the passage of time it requires assisting them to move to a ground floor or to a building with an elevator, we do our best. The member opposite is suggesting that all units should either be ground floor or have access to an elevator. I think that that's making a value decision, because by doing that, by putting in that elevator, we're sacrificing the ability to build perhaps a couple more units and house 2 more families, including perhaps that senior that is no longer able to stay in that apartment. So it is a value decision, and we try to do our best to please as many as we can.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the Minister. It is a value decision. There's no question, and the cost is, what do you measure that cost by? The number of 4 units and so on, or the additional units. At $40,000 a unit, $120,000 might give you an additional 3 units. I don't know what the projected cost is, but I do know what the cost is to make sure that people are not discriminated against because of where they live and so on. And I would say to the Minister this: if in fact that is the case, and when seniors are moved inside their seniors housing complex, that in fact the cost be borne to relocate those people on the ground level, which would be significantly less. It may only resent, $500 or $600 or $1,000, something to that effect, to make sure that somebody pays for their power, for the cable hookup or their phone installation and so on. That should not be. But when anytime you move a senior because of their disability, that's a cost borne by them. And that's not only seniors, but disabled persons. Also, I want to get on to the issue with respect to disabled persons living in seniors complexes. There are some disabled people across this province, and I do know there's one in Amherst for sure, and which I do know that has contacted me on several occasions, who has been living in a seniors complex, and that individual feels insulted by the fact that they're not age 55 or whatever. The seniors are great people, they don't mind that. But for some apparent reason, because there are no disabled facilities available for him in that general vicinity, then he had no other choice but to go into a seniors housing. Now my question is how many disabled units, new units, will be built by your government this year?
Thank you, Member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and I'm going to try to keep track of those questions, but I'd like to go back to your first point, that you made after I sat down, and that was the cost of a senior moving within his or her own complex, or indeed it could be a senior couple. I'm not sure exactly what the Housing Authority's policies would be in this case. Where there's children in the area, or they have able-bodied friends, I suspect that often they pitch in, and so that the cost is minimal. But in the case where there's nobody to help pitch in, I think the member brings up a good point. And my hope would be is that that is recognized by the Housing Authority. And as such, I appreciate the member bringing up the point, and I can see my communications director is busily writing that down as a suggestion to take back to the housing authorities and find out just what their policy is in those cases. So the member made a good point. I've heard his point, and the request is going out to find out whether that's taken into consideration when we do encounter those difficult times. So I thank the member for that. Now, getting back to the member's specific question as to the number of disabled units being built this year, again, it gets back to what comes back from the request for proposals. But clearly, it is likely that there are going to be more disabled people that we are going to want to be able to assist in staying in their own units. And so as the population ages, and indeed as medical science improves, the opportunity to have more people who may have a disability stay in their home is going to grow, and whatever government does should be reflective of that change in the demographics. So it's a policy answer as opposed to a quantitative answer, but the member's point is absolutely right on.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the minister's quite right. He did not quantify the numbers at all, and I can understand, but what I would say to the minister is that he take into consideration the number of disabled units that should be available in any new housing projects that come forward in this year, and as a result of the RFPs in which the money's going to be dispensed into housing. I would also say to the minister as well, is that any new housing stock, irrespective if it has any disabled units in, that it meet the building code standards with respect to accessibility by disabled persons. And the disabled persons have those if, in fact, those proposals are going to go forward. I just want to say briefly, and the minister touched on it with respect to the Shannon Park Lounge, primarily around the housing in Shannon Park. And I do know that the minister and I have had a lot of conversation around that, and I concur with the minister that this is a great opportunity to look at additional housing stock for the province, and to maybe even entertain some private sector involvement with respect to that, as well as the province, or primarily the province as well. Doesn't matter, as long as it becomes affordable social housing stock to some degree, as well as that there's a mix and blend in that community, and that the government look at that. But I know that that's a way off because of negotiations through the Canada Lands Company, the Department of National Defence, and some native claims with respect to the entitlement of that land. So I won't. So the minister, you don't have to respond on that. I just wanted to make comment to that. I do want to go to community services, and I do want to talk about one particular issue that's been extremely troublesome and outstanding to me, that comes through my constituency office, and I know it comes through a lot of MLA's constituency offices across the province. And you know that we heard most recently about the government writing off $44 million in taxes owed to the government. $44 million. Yet, individuals who are on community services who have outstanding debts to this province do not get those debts written off. Some of those debts are 10 years old, and they're coming back by the Department of Community Services through Service Nova Scotia and out to the client to pay those outstanding bills. And those clients are exactly the same position that they were 10 years ago as what they are today, and they're demanding those dollars be paid back. I will tell the minister that, and I asked And I asked the regional manager to investigate this through your legal department, and I don't know if they have, but the federal government of Canada, if you have an outstanding bill, an EI bill to them, and you owe them EI bills as a result of overpayments, after 7 years of statute of limitations, they don't collect it. So I'm going to ask the minister, why does your department continue to collect those monies? And when is a good write-off period for people on social assistance? If in fact corporations and businesses can write off within a couple of years $44 million.
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the honourable member for his question. I think the honourable member knows that in terms of any debts being written off by government, that it would be really a question to the Minister of Finance. I am not so sure about the number 44 million, unless he's referring to some perhaps some employment incentive targets that were put in place previously. But specifically, what the member is trying to say is that there are overpayments that have accrued over time. Some of these overpayments, honourable member, as you in essence are pointing out, go back to the old municipal social assistance programs, which were uploaded at some considerable cost to the province and came with them. In essence, these overpayments often come from people that have perhaps applied for Canada Pension, and it's on the understanding that when the Canada Pension comes in, the money that we basically advance to them during that period of time, which sometimes is not very complementary to the Canada Pension Plan adjudication process, because it can sometimes take years to come up with a decision. So the Department of Community Services, the provinces, steps in through the Department of Community Services and basically provides the fundamentals of life until they can resolve their claim with Canada Pension. Once that money comes in from Canada Pension, those monies that were basically advanced in anticipation of that claim are then expected to be paid back with the lump sum payment. If, though, Canada Pension chooses to turn down the claim, then there's no expectation to pay it back. It's only when, in essence, they're paid twice. We pay them from day one. Canada Pension comes in, let's say, after 3 years, and they pay retroactively. It's that 3 years we're talking about. A lot of these payments emanate from problems with Canada Pension Plan, delays in Canada Pension Plan, and sometimes perhaps the clients, and I'm going to say maybe more so with the older ones when it was under the municipal program, they don't realize that the expectation is that they are to pay back these monies that were basically fronted to them so that they could make do until the Canada Pension Plan rendered hopefully a positive decision. However, having said that, when they work their way off of social assistance, and you're talking about the collection activities of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, that their ability to pay is very much a consideration, and if they're not in a position to make payments, my understanding is that sometimes they will suspend payments. Now, mind you, the debt still is outstanding, but there's just no collection going on. So it depends on their circumstances.
Thank you, Minister. Time has expired for the NDP caucus. I recognize the leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, today I would like to continue where I left off on Friday, back with income assistance. Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Minister, going to the supplementary detail budget on page 411, the amount that's recorded for income assistance payment, Minister, under 2003-2004, the department had estimated in spending $223 million. The actual amount that was spent for 2003-2004 was a little over $227 million. and then I look at the estimated projection for 2004-2005, I see $224 million. I guess my first question is why the fact that the department has spent over $3 million in last year's payments this year, instead of adjusting the budget to reflect the actual cost from last year, the cost basically is just slightly over what was estimated from last year. So I guess my first question is, how do you expect to reach this reduction in the budget for this year?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. And I think you may recall that last week I made reference to the anticipated caseload, because if we know how many what the caseload is going to be, we have a very good idea of what the cost will be. There's you can take averages, and just multiplying it by the number of cases, you pretty much can determine what you should be putting in the budget. So again, we're recognizing that things are going well in Nova Scotia relative to what it has been for really quite some number of years. And with those record employment numbers and the increase in disposable income, we feel comfortable with that number.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I hate to disagree with the minister, but when you look at this budget that's being debated on the floor of the House, there's very little for economic development for rural Nova Scotia. During question period, many questions have been asked. What the government is doing for Britex, for Avon Foods, and there was a whole list from around the province. So we certainly understand. When you look at around rural Nova Scotia, especially the depopulation factor that's taking place. A lot of people are moving to the city, from my area and probably from your area, Mr. Chairman. So again, when you hear of these unfortunate stories like Britex and Avon Foods, you would tend to believe that this department would have to at least give some consideration, because not every one of them is going to move to the city. The Premier has said time and time again, numbers are on the increase, and I agree, especially for Metro Halifax. But when you start looking at what the true numbers are in rural Nova Scotia, a lot of people living in rural Nova Scotia are seniors, but there are young people moving away. And that's not just happening in my area, Mr. Chairman. That's happening in many, many parts of this province. So again, when I see the department actually reducing the amount spent for income assistance, actually, when you look at the numbers last year, they went a little over $3 million than what was actually estimated. And this year, they basically have dropped the money by roughly a little over $3 million again. I have a concern there. I hope that the minister is right, that the number of cases will continue to decrease. But again, the minister knows far better than anyone else in this House. When you look at the statistics for last year, it just shows the opposite. So again, I would cautious the minister by being maybe a little over optimistic in terms of its numbers. But again, there could be a reality before the year is over that the department will need some additional funding instead of reducing that budget. Mr. Chairman, in continuing on that same page, seniors program, I see that the department has actually reduced that budget item by $103,000. Could the minister indicate why this reduction?
Thank you, member. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the honourable member. opposite first question, and I think the member would remember yesterday I was encouraging all members to share that program with their constituents, because this is the program where a senior who is on guaranteed income supplement and still owns their own home can get up to 50% of their municipal property taxes back, up to a maximum of $400. This was a program that was reintroduced by this government, and it's much appreciated by those that qualify. But the problem is that just because you're in guaranteed income supplement does not mean you'll qualify, because you have to also own your own home. So it's a little bit of a word of mouth situation, and again, it's a question of getting the word out there. And I know the member opposite does good constituency work, because I get his letters, and I'm sure that he will pass that on. And as long as we're on the subject of communication, the honourable member brought up the case of a constituent last week who unfortunately had gotten shifted to a caseworker that was not bilingual, and I advised that steps are being taken to address that problem. The member also was referring to where growth was happening in the province, suggesting it's all in the city, and while the city is certainly booming, there's no question about that. And I know we all rejoice in that prosperity. I would point out that just as recently as last month, when the unemployment rate in Nova Scotia fell from 9.2% to 9%, not as low as we want it to be, but a lot lower than it has been historically, all the improvement was outside of the metro area. So that's a very significant drop outside of metro. So while there may be some high-profile businesses that have gotten into difficulty, clearly there are more that are finding opportunity here in the province, and the growth has, in fact, at least during this past month, been rural. That will fluctuate, I know, over time, but I think one should not underestimate the resilience of rural Nova Scotia.
Thank you for that answer, Minister, and recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to acknowledge the Minister's commitment in helping the matter that I raised on Friday with difficulties with one constituent communicating with its caseworker, and I appreciate the Minister looking into it. Mr. Chairman, I want to move over to employment support services. As the Minister is aware of the Department's 2004-2005 business plan, one of the strategic goals in the Department for this coming year is to conduct an evaluation of the employment support services component of the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program. So I guess my first question to the Minister is, what type of evaluation are you planning?
Thank you, member. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The terms of reference are, in fact, in the final stages of being set, and clearly what we're looking for is basically value for money, the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the economy by which we've been delivering the program. How has it served the clients, and indeed how has it served the province? So that is a policy answer to a policy question, but I'm sure the member opposite would concur that 3 years out is a reasonable time to sit back and just look at what we've accomplished in that period of time and whether there are opportunities to perhaps improve yet again.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my next question to the Minister is there any consideration within the Department to look at removing or increasing some of the employment support services that are currently in place?
Thank you, member. Honourable Minister of Community Service.
Yes, I thank the honourable member for his question, because as he would be aware, on page 4.1 of the estimates, if he looks at the second and third lines, which in essence are the program delivery aspect of employment support services, he will take note of the fact that there is a very significant increase forecast for the return to work initiatives and the employment and training field staff over the forecast for 2003-2004. So we think this is a good investment, and we're continuing to invest more in our clients on employment support and income assistance to allow them that same chance to have a career as the rest of us.
Thank you, Minister. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, that's where I'm heading to my next question. On page 4.11, where the minister was making reference to the supplementary detail, I'm looking at the budget line item, return to work initiatives. This indicates roughly an increase of about $171,000. Again, to the minister, with $171,000, are there particular areas where the department is focusing on in terms of providing some support assistance to these individuals with that allocation?
Thank you, member. The honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the honourable member. He is focused on the return to work initiatives. That's not the only component of the employment support program, but the whole program is it's a more holistic program. There are a lot of tools that are available to the caseworker to assist the client to make full use of their abilities, whether it may involve a return to school to perhaps obtain their grade 12 or community college. There could be possibly an employment subsidy. The employment support workers, in fact, are in contact with employers in the community. As the member opposite would likely be aware, the community economic development agencies across the province work with community services in the employment support services component. So it's a multifaceted approach to make sure that the right supports are in place for the client when they need them. So it's hard to just pick one area. They have an entire menu that they can draw upon to assist the client.
The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to, go in a little more details about the type of support that's being provided to those people seeking employment. I know that the department is providing daycare allowance. They're also providing transportation allowance, clothing, equipment, training. Currently, we have residents from Clare traveling to Digby for training. I understand, speaking with a number of them, that the department's rate is $7.50 a day, $150 a month. One way, Mr. Chairman, some of these residents have to travel over 50 kilometers one way. The municipality of Clare has no public transportation, so many of these individuals are having difficulties in trying to meet these requests. As the minister is aware, trying to set a transportation policy province-wide, especially for areas, especially rural areas that have no public transportation available, certainly makes it very challenging for some of these individuals to attend these training programs. I guess what I'm trying to find out from the minister, is there consideration given to some of these individuals, especially living in rural areas where there is no public transportation, to try to provide them with $7.50 to travel at least 40 kilometers one way and back certainly brings upon challenges. So I guess my first question to the Minister, one, is this $7.50 policy, is that the maximum benefit allowed per day for individuals to attend training programs?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member opposite for his question. It is $150 a month maximum. The member has brought up some points that point out the uniqueness of the transportation challenge in rural Nova Scotia, just as one of the previous opposition critics brought out the point that shelter allowances are not consistent, or the cost of shelter, I should say, is not consistent across the province. So what the honourable member is pointing out, that where one area may have an overheated demand for rental accommodation, another area may lack in other infrastructures. So I've taken note of this. My communications director has written it down as we are trying to grapple with what the member articulated so well in terms of how do you grapple with this province-wide when it's only specific to one area, so that you still maintain some sort of control. That's something that should also be given consideration. I know the honourable member represents Clare, and I believe that the King's Transit system is now extending all the way to Digby. Now, that's no help to the people in Clare, but I have some familiarity with this municipal transportation organization, because it was in jeopardy at the time that I was first elected as a councillor, and some good things happened that ultimately took this little transportation authority that by rights is a rural one, should have been one of the most heavily subsidized in North America instead of the most efficient in North America in terms of revenue recovery. And it is now going, I believe, all the way to Digby, or at least well down the Annapolis Valley. And I'm wondering if the member has friends with the Clare Municipal Council that perhaps might like to make a contact with Andy Patterson or the chairman of the King's Transit Authority, because the member is quite right. Public transit is a crucial service, and with the density of population along the French shore, I would think that it might lend itself well to public transit.
The Honourable Member for Clare and Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to hear the Minister saying that he will give consideration to look at the monthly traveling allowance that's being currently allocated, especially for members living in rural Nova Scotia that have to travel a relatively large distance in order to attend some of these programs. So I guess I'm not going to get the Minister to indicate on record today that that amount will go up. But at least I want the department to acknowledge some individuals, and not just especially in my area, but in many parts of this province, that are having challenges, and probably great challenges, with transporting cost in order to attend some of these programs. Again, focusing on these programs, I'm interested, Mr. Chairman, through you. I understand that HRD helps to fund some of these training programs. Maybe the Minister could indicate how much federal funding is in these training programs, how much provincial funding is in these training programs. So let's start off with that one, please. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, by times you've heard me stand up here and be critical of some of the federal programs. By times you've heard me stand up here and compliment them. This is a time to compliment them. There's a good working relationship with human resources skills development. In essence, what happens here is that we continue to provide the basic necessities of life while human resources skills development Canada covers the tuition cost to, say, go back to community college, or possibly if there's a fee to complete their high school. So it's a shared program, and we both do our part, and we enjoy that working relationship with them.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard the minister indicating that this is a shared program. I'm looking at point in the estimate book, page 4.10, under income assistance and employment support services, less recovery, $7.2 million. Am I fair to I guess, to jump to conclusions that HRDC or the federal government is providing the province with $7.2 million in order to support employment support services? I guess that's my first question. And then my second one is the minister indicating that that amount is also matched by the province.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Having discussed it with my two colleagues here, we have come to the unanimous opinion that that is recoveries of overpayments.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe the minister could indicate how much money does Human Resources provide to the province in order to help employment support services.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. In essence, what you're asking is whether the federal monies flow through the Department of Community Services, and that is not the case. That would be over and above what you see here. So I would anticipate by what I'm advised that their checks must go directly to either the clients or to the community colleges, but it does not come through as a recovery in the department.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, for clarification, because I have some questions with regards to this funding. I want to find out, Mr. Chairman, through you to the minister, is the province receiving any federal funding to help individuals through employment support programs? If so, where is this funding located in your budget?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to correct my previous answer. There is a small component that comes through the cost-sharing employment assistance with persons with disability program, which is a federal provincial cost-share program. So there would be a small component that would flow through employment support and income assistance, but still the basic premise of my previous answer is the correct one, because I think the member was asking whether there's a federal component in the main employment support and income assistance program that's included in these numbers. So that answer still remains the same, but with the caveat that there is this one smaller program, which the member would be aware of, where there is a framework agreement with the federal government, and they match provincial dollars.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still not clear. We have some individuals at home that, and I think the program has it's called something different now. It used to be called WINGS program for adults, to allow them to re-enter the working or the job, looking for jobs. What I'm trying to find out is that this funding, either the province is putting up the funding for these training programs, or the province. So I'm trying to find out who is actually picking up the cost for these training programs. And I'm just using as an example the WINGS program, and I stand to be corrected what the program is now called. So maybe the minister could indicate who exactly is funding these types of training programs.
The Minister of Community Services.
Thank the honourable member, and we're starting to surmise that you were referring to the aforementioned WINGS program, but again, the money does not flow through the department for the WINGS program. It is a dollar-for-dollar matching, but the feds invest their own dollars, we invest matching dollars. It is not totaled in our numbers.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
All right, so now we understand through you, Mr. Chairman, that we have at least some type of provincial federal agreements that shares the actual cost. Could the minister indicate how much money are we talking about in the run of a year? And at the same time, could the minister maybe provide us with a copy of the agreement that is currently in place with the province?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'd be pleased to obtain a copy of the agreement and provide that to the honourable member, and we will also endeavour to get a breakdown as to how much money flows on the part of the province as a result of the agreement.
The Honourable Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the minister for his for agreeing to provide us with a copy of that agreement. Mr. Chairman, the reason I was asking, and maybe the minister has an answer, the fact that we have residents from the municipality of Clare traveling to Digby to follow some of these training programs. Has the department looked at maybe providing some of these training programs to individuals from within the municipality of Clare? So rather than having them drive up 40 kilometers one way, to attend these training programs, has the department considered offering programs to these individuals at home instead of having them drive up to Digby?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would suggest to the member opposite that it's going to depend on the nature of the program. Some programs are going to need to have a certain attendance in order to effectively be able to be delivered with any sort of economy of scale, and I would suggest that if that could be accommodated in a smaller community, then it should be done so. But again, it's really just getting the economies of scale to put on the programs.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the minister's comments. Without knowing how many people are actually available for any given program, I guess maybe to try to get some commitment, if the numbers warrants, if the numbers are high enough to allow some training to take place at home, would the minister acknowledge that that could be a reality to allow individuals from within the municipality of Clare, if enough individuals would be available for a given program, that program could be, again, pending on the numbers, be offered within the municipality of Clare?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would tell the member opposite that we'd be pleased where the numbers were right to discuss this with our partners, which includes the former Human Resources Development Canada and the Department of Education in that regard. We are very conscious of the need as well to try to provide services where the numbers warrant in the first language. And of course, Clare, Argyll, Cheticamp, and other parts of the province are unique and certainly add greatly to our diversity and our culture. And that's something to celebrate, but it's also something to respect, that when one can deliver those programs in the first language of those that we're trying to serve, every effort should be done to consider this. So if that was perhaps a side point of what the member opposite was bringing forward, we are very supportive of that point of view.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank the Minister for at least giving consideration, especially when numbers are right, and I guess fair and due consideration can be given. Mr. Chairman, I want to move to my next area of questions, to community support for adults. Again, looking at the supplementary detail, page 4.8, we know in the budget speech a few weeks ago, Mr. Chairman, that the Minister of Finance indicated there would be an additional $10 million more in this year's budget to support adults in care. I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, as probably all members in this House have been asked, especially adults that are challenged and are living at home with their families. The first question that I would have to the Minister is, with this $10 million increase, will any of this new funding will any of this new funding go to help support some of these adults living at home with their families?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The answer, Honourable Member, is yes. And in fact, $1 million of that 10.3 is earmarked for just such priorities. When we launched into the Community Supports for Adults Renewal Initiative, there was a caveat put on that anything that came forward would have to basically be within the existing fiscal envelope. But in actual fact, I was very pleased that we were able to expand those services to the tune of another $1 million to address exactly what the member is talking about.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to hear the Minister indicating that $1 million will be available in this current year to help adults living at home with their families. Could the Minister, I don't know if the Minister has any details on how that $1 million will be broken down, if increases have already been identified, in what area. So I guess my next question to the Minister, if he does have some information, could he indicate to, through you, Mr. Chairman, how the department is looking at spending this additional $1 million in funding?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The honourable member would be aware that in March of 2004, we released the discussion paper, and this follows about 18 months of pretty extensive consultation right across the province, and in fact, gleaning information about best practices and what are done in other jurisdictions right across the country. Within that, there is basically a menu, if you will, of suggestions, and we are very pleased with the uptake on the response, and we feel that once we've got all the response between now and June the 30th, we'll be able to move forward and then be able to give definitive answers to the members' questions.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe there's approximately 22 minutes left. I will be sharing the rest of my time with my colleague from Clayton Park? Halifax, Clayton Park. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I welcome the opportunity today to have a chance to have a bit of dialogue and some questions back and forth with the Minister of Community Services. As you're well aware, each one of us, and I think whether we're new MLAs or not, we get a lot of calls and a lot of inquiries about social services and about issues that impact on your department or relate back to the Community Services Department. And it's therefore been a real eye-opener to me in a fairly affluent area of Clayton Park to realize that there are many people that are on social assistance and many people who rely on many of the programs that fall within your mandate and your authority. And it's, you know, as I say, it's been a real surprise. I was councillor for virtually the same area in large respect for several years and spoke very much to people who had property and homes and more people of more substance, and I was not aware of some of the crushing needs of the other people living in that same area. So to me, it's been a real eye-opener to see another side of my same community that I thought I knew so well. And I have a number of questions relating to issues that come up on a daily basis, really, in our office. On the alternate care arrangements for people with disabilities, and again, it relates to a specific case, but I'm sure it's indicative, and I won't go into names and so on, I believe it's indicative of systems that exist for many people. And we've been talking about, and I think it falls into the program that has been tried where you have 10 people who have been looking at self-administered care, self-managed. Thank you very much. Self-managed attendant care, I believe. Now, in my case, it's a fairly young woman who's about 35 years old, and she's lived with her mother for forever. Her mother is at a point where she can't continue to care for her. And they were told some years ago that the option was there for her daughter to have the funds to live on her own, and that's no longer available. So at the time when it was offered, they didn't need it, and the arrangement they had where the mother cared for the daughter, it was working. But now a few years have passed, and they find that they've hit the point where the mother can't continue that kind of care. It's taking a heavy toll on her health, and they would like to have her daughter live independently with the kind of help she needs. But they now discover that it's not an option, it's not available to them. And the alternative that's been offered, and there was some late debate discussion on that last week, the alternative has been either a nursing home or one of your larger residential facilities, something like 16 or 20 people living in a residential facility, both of which are really inappropriate for this woman who doesn't have severe mental disability, and neither is she comfortable with the idea of being put in a home with seniors. She doesn't feel that's the right place for her either. So what can you offer in the way of some hope that there's another way to manage these cases that don't fall neatly into a category? And I'll be frank, just for the minister, the mother and the daughter feel that the options offered to them are warehousing, that her daughter will be housed but kept in a warehouse, essentially. Her life will be very restricted. She wouldn't be able to, if she's in a nursing home, she wouldn't have the option of visiting her doctor and going to her hairdresser and having any kind of a life outside of that home. She wants to be able to live a life where she has a certain amount of independence, and her problem is medical, really far more than mental. So if you could give me some sense of what options are available for people that don't fit neatly into those categories.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member opposite for the question. First of all, I want to go on the record as saying that I believe that those programs that were in place have been transferred over to health by and large, but specifically with your point about trying to customize the programs to those that we're trying to support, that in essence is exactly the direction that I anticipate we're going to be going with the renewal initiative. And perhaps if I might suggest that if you wanted a copy of the renewal initiative, the discussion paper, if this mother and daughter has not already obtained a copy, they might be well pleased by what they saw there, and hopefully that would provide them with some comfort that that is not what we envisioned for your constituent.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pursue this a little further. You mentioned the Department of Health, and in this particular case of a client, they feel that they were switched over to the Department of Health, but they haven't been offered that kind of an option through the Department of Health. They actually felt they were better off with the Department of Community Services, but I'm not sure that they are or not. But they feel a little bit like they've been pushed from one department to another, but with no real difference in the care, no options provided. These people are really quite desperate. It's an awful thing to be in your office and have somebody say, "I hope you can work a miracle for me," because they have been part of your consultative group. They've been involved in some roundtables or some focus groups. They've put their input in and opened their heart to the department. And their feeling on your renewal initiative is that it's very, very slow in coming to any kind of options, that it's sort of one discussion paper after another, or, you know, really, really slow. Can you respond to that?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I guess I get an acknowledgement that in fact the member realizes that those programs are actually delivered through health now. But with regards to the speed of the Community Supports for Adults Renewal Initiative, we wanted to do it right. It's been about 25 years since it's been done, as I have been advised by my staff. And in fact, it's interesting that you make reference to the fact that you don't think it's moving fast enough, because I did extend the period for a response by an additional 6 weeks due to requests basically from the people that we're trying to work with. So clearly, whenever one makes a decision, you're not going to please everybody, but my sense is that the majority of people wanted us to take a little bit more time and get it right.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Well, I do believe we should get it right too, and you know, I don't disagree with you. If there's people that want to be heard, I think it's important to leave the door open for that feedback. It's just that it seems like it's had years to percolate through the system and for answers to come. And some people are at a point where there's a crisis in their lives, and they're waiting for a resolution that is really in the hands of these working groups or the recommendations that are coming out. So waiting another 6 months or however long it may be is very, very difficult to people who are physically and emotionally at the end of their tether. And I know you personally deal with your own constituents who are in those very difficult situations where it is very emotional and it is very difficult to sustain the situations that they are in, and they are innumerable, right? There's many different kinds. But I do feel that it is important that we get to some resolution, and hopefully you have a role in that, even if it is the Department of Health. I would assume that Community Services is engaged in that process as well. Maybe you're not the lead department, but no, that's okay. If I'm wrong, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I assume you're involved. I think it's just really important that we look at that again, that the flexibility in terms of identifying what people's needs are, because they don't all fit neatly into a category. And so I'd like that to be very, very much kept in mind. The quality of life for individuals is the most important. Do you want to answer? Yes, certainly.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the member opposite for a question, because really what she has discovered in working with her constituents is very much mirrored by, indeed, what I've discovered working with my own. And the fact that there's more money in the budget to accommodate some of the things that the member is calling for, I hope would be seen as something very tangible, that in fact we are moving in that direction. And while a decision may have been made in the past to move some of these services to health, the idea of supervised apartments, in-home support, and some of these other, I think, progressive approaches to assisting individuals and their families in overcoming some of the challenges they face with these disabilities, whether it be intellectual, physical, or mental health consumer challenges, are in fact not only recognized in the renewal initiative, but they're in the budget. And that to me is good news, and I hope it's good news for your constituent.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Well, thank you very much. It'll be good news if they can access some of these programs, then I'll be happy then. We'll continue to lobby on their behalf and see. I appreciate knowing that I can call the minister if we run into complete roadblocks. He said so in the past that we're welcome to do that, and I have yet to call him personally, so this may be an instance where I will have to. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about training opportunities for your staff throughout community services, and whether or not you have opportunities for the staff, particularly your frontline staff that are dealing with these, often desperate cases, but difficult and challenging cases on a day-to-day basis. Do we offer some training and some respite for them in terms of coping with the stresses that go along with this job? Or operating, but.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The member opposite has actually put her finger on something that in fact is going on within the department. In the human resources section, that is a priority in fact to identify those areas and make sure that that balance is brought to the workplace, not only for the benefit of the staff, but ultimately, of course, for the benefit of those that we serve.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
I wonder if you could be specific on just what percentage of your frontline staff will be getting some training, or how frequently they get that training. And I'm really looking at training that helps them to I guess, stay fresh and I guess to do the best job they can do, so that they don't become jaded, they don't become disgusted with the whole situation. So what training are we doing, and how frequently, and how many people get to go?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member opposite. Because there's so much diversity within the challenges within the department, so much diversity in the challenges for all the people that work in the department, it is being taken on an individual basis, so every employee has their own training program in essence with looking at the challenges, and so it's a very individualized approach to this, and hopefully as a result of that, benefits will not only flow to our clients, but we also hope that it'll be make it for a better workplace for all our staff.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Would the minister be able to tell me what dollar figure we put on training in your department? I had the opportunity to ask some training questions of the minister or the Public Service Commission, but they were unable to tell me by department. They said a lot of money is spent within each department. So I'd like to know with your department how many dollars are spent, or how much have you allocated in this budget coming up? And perhaps you could put it in context for your total budget.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we are going into another screen, another program actually, and another screen, and we should have that number momentarily. I would say that from my perspective, I see it more for the more senior members of staff when they have to travel out of province, because all those travel approvals have to come through me, through the minister. We close there. I'm advised that the number is near at hand. Okay. Okay. It is $738,000. And that would represent approximately, that's about 0.1 of 1%, right? 1/10 of 1%.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the attitude of the department, I guess, in terms of overpayments to clients, and I'm thinking of social service recipients or community services recipients. I had occasion again to meet somebody in person who had managed to become more independent, had now had a job at Tim Hortons, was working on her own, had a husband now, which she didn't before when she was on community services, but she owes $3,600 in back payments for the period of time in which she was working part-time and kind of trying to make that transition. And through no fault of her own, she was honest and upfront about the work she was doing and the steps she was taking, but the payments were larger than they should have been. And community services then says, well, you owe us $3,600, and here's somebody who's really, teetering on the edge, who's got to repay that money over some period of time. And she had a payment schedule to repay it at about $30 a month, which she was doing. But the crunch or the crisis came when community services moved in to take her income tax rebate, which would have been coming back this spring. And for this particular family, that was a real crisis because they planned to move, and that was going to pay for their moving and for their damage deposit in a cheaper location. They were moving to another community in HRM. So it comes to mind that we're not providing any incentive. The letter I got from that woman said, it's so hard, and I'm trying so hard to make it on my own, and why would you do things like this that make it so difficult for us? So I'd like to ask, if you have a comment for those cases where we're doing this clawback, if you could just sort of, because that's obviously a policy of the department to seek back these monies that are owed.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member opposite for her question. I am not familiar with a specific case, but in essence, I gather she is telling me that there was an error in the determination of the monthly budget, and as a result of that, a $3,600 overpayment accumulated over time. Okay, the member opposite is nodding. I'm not specific. I'm not aware of the specifics that would prompt them to use that avenue of going to the Canada Customs and Revenue Agency and asking them to turn over income tax refund monies. It is an avenue that is available, and we do work with other government agencies. But my hope would be that if the member opposite feels that this was not a reasonable thing to do, that she would have the comfort to call the supervisor, her supervisor for the community services in the area, which would be your contact, have a discussion with him or her and see if you can make your case. I would tell you that long before I was a minister, and definitely Minister of Community Services, the response I got from the area supervisor, whoever it was at the time, always gave me a confidence that if it was reasonable, it would be done. So I'm not sure if the member opposite has followed that avenue, but I would encourage her to do so if she has not already done it.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. In this particular case, we made some calls, and half of it was taken off and given to them. The other half the department took. So there was a compromise made. But I think what it points out is, when we sit here in government, we see huge write-offs, hundreds of thousands of dollars written off with community economic development loans or Office of Economic Development loans, NSBI, whatever it may be, but large amounts. And yet we don't have any incentive for people at this more vulnerable end of our community. And what I would think, and I'd like to propose to you, that there should be something like a bonus for her to keep working. If she continues to work and doesn't return to social assistance, maybe then you'd forgive the loan, because that would give her an incentive to continue, because any of the overpayment, as I say, was through an error in the department, not through any error or wrongdoing on the part of the individual. So maybe you just comment on the idea of creating some kind of an incentive or a positive view of helping people and recognizing that they've made a huge commitment to change entirely their lifestyle in a sense, because it's very hard to make that transition, as you're aware of.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And in fact, when the new Employment Support and Income Assistance Program came in, there were built-in incentives. Under the old programs, in many cases, there was a dollar-for-dollar offset, or perhaps after $150 or $200, depending on the person's circumstances. And in fact, there was no recognition of the cost of employment. So in fact, one of the frustrations that some of the caseworkers felt at the time is that they would have The classic case of there'd be a single parent, wants to go back to work, everything is right about this person, can get a job, but the first job is for minimum wage. And because they have to come up with childcare, because they have to come up with transportation, and then at the end of the day, they were thanked by losing their entire paycheck, or more than it cost them to go out and work. That was incorporated into the program. That's why there's $400 a month for childcare available under the program. That's why there is $150 a month for transportation. That's why we will pick up the cost of maybe it's a hard hat, work boots, or whatever is needed for the client to take that first step into a career. And in addition to that, that's why they are able to keep 30% of the net. Is it net? No, it would be the gross. 30% of the gross income, so that provides a powerful incentive, I would suggest, because if a client was in a family situation and let's say that their social assistance check for the month was, let's say, $800, there's one child, so you get another $250 a month for the National Child Benefit, which is no longer clawed back. We were one of the provinces that ended that practice, and very pleased to say that no longer happens in Nova Scotia. When the National Child Benefit goes up, that flows directly to the client. It flows to all Nova Scotians, whether they be working poor or on social assistance. So the point here is that if the client can go out, get a job that pays, say, $1,000, basically their costs of employment are covered. They still get the full amount of the social assistance check, plus they've got $300 now, which is basically their discretionary income. That's the income to improve what they're able to serve to the children at night. You know, it's the difference perhaps between eating hot dogs and maybe being able to purchase an occasional chicken or something that's would be a better diet, and certainly perhaps more appetizing to have variety. It's the difference between being able to rent a movie or go out to the movies. It's the difference between occasionally maybe able to go out for supper. That $300 is a tremendous incentive. But the member opposite brings up the question as to whether there should be an incentive. There is an incentive in place. We might not agree on the size of the incentive, but we do agree that there should be an incentive, and there is one.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
I'm happy to hear the transitional aspects of the program that are in place. I would like to know how long that transitional period is allowed to exist, where you have the extra $300 and you get the $400 a month for daycare and so on. I'm sure there's a limit to that. I'd like to know that, and it's because I'm not familiar with it, so I would appreciate that. And again, I'd still think we come back to the idea of the overpayments during that transitional period. In this case, this woman is being asked to repay it, so why can't there be, again, a case-by-case where you look at whether or not this person is managing and doing well and should be, you know, really not penalized? That's what I'd like to see.
The time for the honourable member has elapsed. The minister, short reply.
With regards to the question as to when the transition period ends, it depends on the size of the client's income. When the income is such that there's a net gain, even after taking the most favorable calculation, at that point in time, they're then on to the 12-month transitional pharmacare period. But it's always calculated to the benefit of the client.
Okay, the honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question, I had a couple of questions for the Minister of Community Services, again on the topic of housing. And just very briefly, I have had a number of constituents who are concerned about the percentage of wheelchair accessible housing and whether there is any particular protocol for ensuring that a certain number of the new housing units built will in fact be accessible.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the honourable member for her question and her concern. It is a question that has been raised by others, and The answer I can give is not a specific percentage, other than it is a concern with the changing demographics, and clearly there's going to be a greater demand for accessible housing and clearly also accessible, affordable housing, that this will be a consideration as we go through the response to the request for proposals. And I think that ultimately we've got to see a greater presence of affordable housing in our public housing mix.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Okay, I'm sorry I had missed that earlier question. I guess what I would just leave you with is that Nova Scotia has the highest percentage of wheelchair users in the country, which is 20.6. So that would suggest, if we assume that it's a representative population, we should be looking at probably a fifth of those new units should be accessible, or perhaps there should be retrofitting. Just leave that with you. Another question that I had on housing is that there are some co-ops which I have been dealing with which have been collapsed into one another. And at that time, usually 1 or 2 units are sold off. And I wondered simply whether there is any protocol, again, for the divestiture of provincial housing stock and disclosure of that and so on.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And Honourable Member, your previous question was totally an appropriate one, and your previous question was a totally appropriate, and you cannot expect it to be in all places at the same time. So make no apologies for asking the question. You had made reference to 20.2%. I'm going to get to your second question, but I think that is a number that is used to measure the percentage of Nova Scotians with self-reported disabilities. I'm not sure that would apply to Nova Scotians that are necessarily in wheelchairs, but your point is quite correct. We are unfortunately hold the distinction of having by far and away the largest percentage of our citizens with a disability. Some of it may pertain to a problem with mobility. We've got an older population. This is a place where people like to come and retire, and with age sometimes come other challenges. We also have the misfortune of being known as the tailpipe of North America, and that, with some of our industrial past, has led to a disproportionate number of Nova Scotians with lung problems, lung disease. So those are some of the reasons, but the member's point is an appropriate one. You're asking about the process for the divestiture of public housing units. Could I perhaps offer a couple of examples, and that might help frame the debate? With Mulgrave Park some years ago, this is of course an area in the North End for those that are not from the city, which is very high density housing, and it got to the stage where the community actually felt that there needed a greater sense of diversity, and this came forward from that community, and there was an agreement with the housing authority that in fact there should be the selling off of some of the units, and it's worked well, and things have gotten better. And what was the name of the apartment there? That villa. The villa, Marilyn. The villa. The villa that was. What's the name of the villa? That's it. There was one particular apartment building within Mulgrave Park that was particularly problematic. It really had some challenges, and in fact, by going in and addressing some of these and bringing some diversity, in this case it was to make sure that there was not only a cultural blend, but also representation from right across the financial spectrum, that it really turned out to be a very good thing for that community. So what I'm trying to say is we do not take these decisions lightly. The member is quite passionate, as am I, about the need for affordable housing, and so you never want to be taking units out of stock unless it's agreed that it is a benefit to it's a benefit that can be agreed upon by the community.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
So I guess there isn't a specific protocol at this point, but it is a question of community consultation, perhaps. So as you know, I would certainly be very glad to know if there is, in fact, a specific protocol developed at that point and for notification as well to the broader community, because certainly the concerns of diversity are valid ones, but you know, one needs to ensure that there has been, what? Sorry. You know, I would just be very glad to have it a transparent process by which when there is a decision to remove provincial assets from the provincial portfolio, that in fact is the case. I had only one other very quick question, and I won't keep you anymore. And it's a very specific one, and it's about Quick Card for social assistance recipients. I understand that it does not cover the fees for consultants, so that if a general practitioner refers somebody for consultation, that fee is not covered. Is that correct? Maybe you could just clarify that for me.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yeah.
Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there's a very basic dental coverage that they administer for us. So whatever is covered under that program, Quick Card would pay, and we reimburse them. It's based on an 80-20 cost-sharing arrangement with the client, which, as the member from Clare has pointed out, is not an easy thing for all social assistance recipients to cover the 20. In fact, it's not an easy thing to cover the 20%. But from the point of view of the department, we've gone to basically providing virtually zero in terms of dental care to about $3 million this year. So I think it's a move in the right direction. Could it be better? I think that there's no question, but it's moving in the right direction. With regards to your concern, I think specifically it would be about the Greystone community, which is the 252 public housing units in your constituency. Honourable Member, I would tell you that you've taken an interest in your community, and that if there's any proposed changes to the mix of public housing, I would ask you to be part of that process. You represent Halifax Atlantic, and your comments would always be welcome.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Okay, I guess that wraps up dentistry and housing. So thank you very much. I'll pass my time over.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Minister. And I want to thank my colleagues for giving me the opportunity to once again pose some questions to you. Mr. Minister, when we left off, we were talking about overpayments and outstanding debts by community service recipients, and you outlined a number of those overpayments might very well be because of the Canada pension disability benefits that came forward to individuals, and there's not a duplication of income, so that income would have been considered to be given theirs on day one. There's also, with respect to the additional overpayment money that they might have garnered through an employment practice after in fact they went back to work. But there's also additional overpayment monies that the Department of Community Services brings upon people, and then later on they pay them extra money that they shouldn't have paid them, and because of maybe some of the benefits that have gone to them, and then they claw them back saying that they shouldn't have or were not rightfully entitled to those benefits. And those are the kind of benefits overpayments. I don't want to dwell on this one, and I don't want you to respond on this one. I just ask you to take into consideration and ask your legal department to have a look at the possibilities of, in fact, putting a statute of limitations whereby the department cannot collect these dollars, if I may, Mr. Minister, whereby the department may not collect these dollars, and it's very important that be considered. If at other levels of government it can be considered, then it should be considered there as well. And it's a very important thing to look at with respect to taking some of the burden off of those individuals, because through no fault of their own, if the Department of Community Services has not paid them the rightful allotment to them, they will only go back 6 months, and then they will give them the additional dollars that they're rightfully entitled to. If they've been carrying that practice on for years, then they won't reimburse the individuals for those dollars. So I think there needs to be some consideration and look at with respect to limitations, and I would greatly appreciate it. The other issue is around defrauding of community services. When an individual is being seen to be considered defrauding the community services, taking money which they were not rightfully entitled to, and there's an investigation by the department through an eligibility review officer or other investigative measures, what happens is once the department has decided that the individual has defrauded the community services department of monies that they or benefits that they were not rightfully entitled to, they're cut off immediately. They're not given this opportunity of being innocent until proven guilty through an appeal process or going through the courts. They're immediately cut off. My question is that everyone in society, including police officers, if they're found in violation of the law or within their workplace, they're usually suspended with pay and so on. So there seems to be a double standard here with persons on community services. So I'm wondering if the minister would seriously give that some thought with respect to continuing to provide those benefits to individuals and until at least an appeal process has been heard and or a court hearing has taken place.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member opposite for that question. I can tell the member opposite that in my own experience as an MLA and as minister, occasionally when I get letters where people are objecting to the decision to cut them off, typically I have been advised that they have been reinstated until the time of their appeal. Now, I'm not sure that that's the case all the time, but it certainly has been brought to my attention that that is at least common practice, if not policy.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the minister. I'm disappointed. I don't think it's common practice, although that is what you tell me, and I can only take your word for it. All I can tell you is from the experiences out of the office that that I represent in Dartmouth North with respect to the kind of complaints and concerns that come forward through my CA and so on. And this is a very important one. And we have had some cases whereby individuals weren't, and there was a huge battle with respect to even trying to get some benefits for them, at least to hold them off. The other, I want to go into the area of persons with disabilities, which in fact, Mr. Minister, is a very important issue, and we do know in the Royal area, and I do know that the honourable member from Clare has brought it up with respect to accessible transportation, particularly in the Clare-Argyll area, and we do know that Dial-A-Ride in Antigonish and in the Guysborough area, and we do know that about the Kings County Alternative Transportation Services Society and so on. And I want to ask you, Minister, I have heard from Leo, as well as you have heard as well, that these costs continue to escalate. And not only do people who use these alternative sources, not only are they not disabled, but they're seniors and other individuals as well. So there's a time frame on which these individuals can actually use the accessible transportation that's available to them in the Royal area. And in the Royal area, it's becoming even tougher because a lot of the hospitals have closed, and it means longer rides and so on. So people have to govern or gear their time to the most unusual hours sometimes in order to reach appointments and so on. So there's one issue with respect, is alternative transportation for disabled in rural communities serving its purpose and doing it well? And number two, is there a need to enhance upon that level of service as well?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
And one more finally,
Sure.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, before I sit down. Are there any alternative disabled services available that are now not operating?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member opposite for bringing up the question. Actually, the Minister for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations is the funding minister for these various alternative transportation organizations. I do have some knowledge of this because of my friendship and support over the years, a friendship with the local Kings County Alternative Transportation Society and indeed with the chairman, Chuck Richardson. The member opposite has described well the service that is provided there. It's an invaluable service. It makes a lot of sense. You can justify it for many different reasons if you need to justify it. And I think that just basically fundamentally providing transportation, which is an essential necessity of life, is reason enough. I share the member's passion for these organizations, and I believe that there was one just recently opened in Shelburne, and I think that there may have actually been two in this past fiscal year, but again, I probably straying beyond my area of expertise, and I defer that to my colleague, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do apologize to the minister if I've gotten the wrong portfolio, but my understanding is that a number of the department meets together to discuss issues around disabilities and so on, and that the minister would be very much aware of all the issues discussed by Health, Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, Education, and Department of Community Services are some of the areas, and transportation. I believe there are 5 ministers that sit at a table and discuss issues around providing services to persons with disabilities. I'm wondering, Minister, how many times do you meet, and are those minutes available to the members of this legislature on the discussions in which take place at those meetings on discussions with respect to this particular portfolio anyway?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member opposite for his question. I can tell you that we should be meeting twice a year. The last meeting was about a month ago. It had been too long since the previous meeting because I was a minister in a different portfolio at that time, and things like elections and whatnot, and the change perhaps in the executive director at the Disabled Persons Commission, which is the coordinating body for these meetings, may have perhaps been a reason for the delay, but I would say it's not an excuse for the delay. So we are looking forward to meeting again later this year. The date has already been set. I've forgotten the date off the top of my head, but I am looking forward to it again. And as to the minutes, honourable member, I've got to confess that minutes that come to me are of interest. I try to apprise myself of what's been written, but the question has never really occurred to me as to whether it was available publicly or not, but I'd be happy to get the member that information, or that answer.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Honourable Minister. I think there's a very good reason why these discussions are important for all members of the legislature to know, because we do set tone and direction on where government's going and what government sees as a priority and where government is going to met out its resources. When in fact, and when the discussions at that cabinet table with all those ministers available give us a sense of direction and what is the priority of government and what government sees as a priority, particularly in the issue of disabled persons. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because I know a disabled person who had tried to, this particular disabled person is a brain injury individual, suffered severe traumatic brain injury. And when I brought the question up to the Minister of Health, the Minister of Health said that it's a matter of resources, and that there wasn't money set aside for alternative therapies and so on with respect to that. Then the individual was directed to go back to community services with respect to special needs. Now, the Department of Community Services are not in lockstep with the Minister of Health And therein lies the problem. That's the reason why I asked what kind of conversations go on in this particular area, and how can you help? Because if in fact you're directed back to community services and special needs, and in my opinion, I have to say, Minister, in defense of your department, it is a health issue. But since health doesn't address the issue, then it should be addressed by the Department of Community Services under special needs. Now, I'm not about to name the client or the individual on the legislative floor during budget deliberations, but I do want you to know that it's an important issue, and that's the reason why that connect needs to be there. So tell me how your department deals with the Department of Health when, in fact, a special need comes up, like alternative therapy, if in fact there are requests for alternative therapies.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the member opposite for bringing up a point which is a legitimate concern. Honourable member, shortly after the time that the deputy got this appointment, she recognized that there was a lack of coordination between these two departments. In many cases, there is an overlap there, and having the ability to define who should be serving who and doing it in some sort of coordinating manner was clearly an area in need of attention. So about 6 months ago, we undertook to hire a former senior Department of Health manager who, and again, she had recently taken her retirement, I believe, and it was for the sole purpose of trying to better coordinate the two departments. And I can tell you that the amount of communication and attempt to reduce overlap, duplication, and to generally streamline our services is an active undertaking between the two departments, and the member has basically pointed out the need for this perhaps to have happened many years ago, but in fact it is actively in the works for the last 6 months in an official manner.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm pleased to see that the minister's moving in a direction, but the direction is rather slow, particularly when there are individuals out there in our province who are seeking these very real needs. These are very, very real needs. They can't wait for today, tomorrow, and so on and so forth. Particularly with this is one particular isolated incident where, in fact, the individual who should be receiving the services under the Department of Health is then asked to go back to the Department of Community Services and Special Needs. Another real issue is with respect to wheelchairs and technical aids assistance, which are special needs. And the individuals are out there expecting to fundraise for these particular particular needs, when in fact it should be under the Department of Health Medical Services Insurance to cover for those wheelchairs, so that those individuals aren't embarrassed in having to work out there and fundraise to charitable organizations who no longer have the kind of dollars that they used to have. So, Minister, I'm going to ask you, through you and your Department of Health, and who's ever in the connect with respect to that, when will you set up a technical aids program that can be administered by disabled persons so as to save the taxpayers a heck of a lot of money and keep people out of hospitals, or bring people out of hospitals quicker than what they should be there, because they don't have the technical aids needed to bring that support about. So I just asked you to give me some summary on that.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, in fact, one of our blueprint commitments was a wheelchair recycling program. The initial draft that has come forward is, in fact, something a little bit more comprehensive than that, and targeting first to minors. I think that would be the best way to describe it. There are some attempts to try to keep track of surplus technical aids, wheelchairs specifically. I know the King's Regional Rehabilitation Centre attempts to do this, but with reference to the member's specific question, the Disabled Persons Commission is working on this. They've come and they've made their first preliminary report back to, in fact, the coordinating committee of ministers. And we had some questions, we gave them some direction, and we're looking forward to hearing from them again. And the idea was that this would be coordinated with the Abilities Foundation, who might actually be the one that was the agent to carry it out with funding from the Department of Community Services.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Minister. The Minister, that's I guess, somewhat plausible, that there's some direction. But the bottom line is this, is that if, in fact, a Nova Scotian needs a prosthesis, it's fully covered under the MSI. There's no question about it. If an individual needs an orthotics, a long leg brace or something of that nature, it's not fully covered. And if individuals don't have insurance plans, then they have to cover that. If not, they have to fundraise, the same as a wheelchair. That, to me, is somewhat very inexcusable. You know, there's no need. And I do appreciate, the Abilities Foundation, because I know their good work and their good work over the years, and I do appreciate them coming on side with respect to this, but it's going to only be it's going to be such a minute program to start off with, because all you're dealing with is the younger citizens who need wheelchairs and the recycling program. And one size doesn't fit all, and the medical society will tell you that these are specially designed wheelchairs, so they will know how to work that out. I've got about a couple of minutes before I need to pass this on, before I pass this on to some of my colleagues, but I want to talk about the Kendrick report. The Kendrick report was commissioned in 2000, I believe, 2000, came forward in 2001. There was a huge number of recommendations. There were many recommendations in which the Kendrick Coalition, some 47 members, formed together of a coalition, and they asked this government to liaison with them about some of the recommendations and changes. The very first one and the most important one they wanted was a blue ribbon committee that would look at those issues which they feel are important and the government should address immediately, and those in which the government may take some time. So there was a timetable. I asked you, Minister, what's happened to the Kendrick report? And in fact, has there and will there be, well, obviously there hasn't been, so I guess, will there ever be a blue ribbon committee struck to do an assessment and provide recommendations on the Kendrick report to government? Now, you got to remember, Mr. Minister, that this was a report that also went through a peer study.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the member opposite for his question. And just by way of a little background, the member would probably be aware that I have met with the Kendrick Coalition, some of their key committee members, and look forward to continuing that dialogue. Also, the member opposite would know that they contributed significantly to the renewal initiative, as did the coalition, or Dr. Kendrick's report did form some of the basis for what came forward. It is referenced in the appendix, and so in essence, much of what was done there was drawn upon in producing the discussion paper. With reference to the Blue Ribbon Committee, at this point in time, we do have the Community Committee, which is supposed to vet what has come forward. I'm looking for them to do this. I know that during the summertime, it was not as active as the membership had hoped it would be, but there have been meetings since that time, and they do provide that grassroots input that, in fact, we drew upon when we went through the renewal initiative. In fact, there was over 50 different groups and organizations that we consulted, including not only clients within the program, their families, the service providers. Clearly, staff within the department have an area of expertise. We went to advocacy organizations and consulted with them, and really it was quite a comprehensive consultation And as such, the Kendrick Coalition certainly had a chance and a role to play in contributing to the discussion paper and the response to the discussion paper.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just wondering, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister, I will ask the Minister if, in fact, he has seen the Kendrick Report Coalition. It's a small paper on full citizenship for persons with disabilities, and it was a small report that was done in July of 2003, and it outlined 5 recommendations, Minister, and I want to read those recommendations off to you just briefly. It was an income trust, and it said the Nova Scotia government should set up an income trust, the creation of the trust fund up to $100,000 for children with disabilities, and this money should not be counted in as income in relation to social assistance and support services. Minister, you've probably seen that recommendation. Hopefully you will respond to that recommendation. Recommendation number 2, the rights of residents during the labor dispute, and we can talk about that. The RRSS was a very, very important one whereby many disabled persons were displaced all across the province and so on. And finally, not finally, but recommendation number 3, in-home supports being recommended removed from community services removed from health back into community services. And as a matter of fact, recommendation number 4 is Provincial Planning Committee, and recommendation number 5 is support of that planning. And I just want to read these off to you, Minister, because I don't have the time back, but if you could just give a brief response on the status of these recommendations and where you are.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and all 5 I think are important to consider and where we go from where we are to where we want to be, and as such, this should, I feel, be reflected in what ultimately comes out of the discussion paper, all certainly given consideration. There were 2 points there that I would like to comment on specifically. The first one is the rights of the disabled during a labor interruption. I want to make the point that I've had many approaches from organizations that are there for the sole purpose of serving the disabled community, who've expressed their grave concerns over what was able to transpire during that labor dispute, and wishing government to take steps to see that that not be allowed to happen again. And also from the families, and where possible, sometimes even clients have expressed concern about that not being allowed to happen again. So this is the feedback that I've gotten as Minister of Community Services, and I can tell you, Honourable Member, I did not enjoy what happened to the residents at RRSS during that labor disruption. The other point which I want to address is the in-home supports, and in fact that is something that we see flowing from that $1 million as a start. So while we're not able to turn back the clock in terms of what got passed over to health, there are some higher functioning persons with disabilities who, perhaps with a little bit of help, might well be able to stay in their home, but those supports have to be there, as long as it's good for both parents and the disabled person. So that is one thing that is actually actively not only being considered, but has been provided for in the budget, and I hope that this is something that will flow from the discussion paper and the new program.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North. No, you're finished? Okay, the Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my limited time, I'd like to ask the Minister some questions.
You have approximately 25 minutes.
By your standard, yes, but by my caucuses, no. So thank you,
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to have the Minister address a number of things. I've written the Minister around the issue of residential care, group homes, and so on. The response I've gotten is that that there isn't really there's nothing to indicate that there's any great need in my constituency. I think if my memory is right, was Mrs. Linda McPhee, who was in 9 Mile River, who was actually offered a piece of land for a residential facility to be built on their property because they have a son in need. And like a number of cases, people have they're getting more elderly, and the difficulty of looking after a family member. But I would like if the minister could just clarify for me the difference between a group home, a small options home, and residential care, and if or residential placements, and if these somehow are what's intertwined with those definitions before I move on.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Honourable Member. Yes, you are not shy about